health crisis for personal gain. And here comes the problem. The problem is, since 1799, no legislative action has ensured that civil rights are protected and defended under the constitutional protections if there is a public health emergency. The closest we got, and this was the California Supreme Court case, Juho v. Williamson, back in the early part of the 1900s, the California Supreme Court, and I shudder to think that the California Supreme Court was the only one that got it right, but they, in fact, are the only one that got it right. They said a capricious health determination cannot suspend civil liberties. And that's a California Supreme Court decision, but it never has survived at the United States Supreme Court, ever. That is the reason why I said in the spring of 2020, we needed to call this thing a experimental gene therapy. Why? Because under an experimental gene therapy, Jacobson and vaccinations in public health is not the prevailing argument. The prevailing argument is whether or not a person is entitled to elective participation in voluntary experimentation on experimental therapies. And the Supreme Court has decided that issue. And the problem is, because we called it a vaccine, because we called it a pandemic, and by the way, because no one in the alt media is willing to take my lead and say, let's stop calling it a vaccine. Every time you do that, you turn this into a Jacobson case. And this is not a Jacobson case. This is actually a case about mandatory and forced participation in experimental medical clinical trial, and the Supreme Court has outlawed that.